Welcome back. This morning I was looking at the forums on chess.com and I saw a thread there posted something to the effect that I can't break 600. And in the actual body of their text, they said basically the players in the upper 500s and 600s are just too tough for them. And it occurred to me that probably a lot of people are in that situation, maybe even some of you. So I just clicked on that person's profile and looked at some of their games. And one of the very first ones, very near the top of their archives, was a game in which both players had an accuracy report or an accuracy score on the game review of about 20%. And I think they combined for about 20 blunders. And I thought maybe I can help. Like, I can't help players that are around 1,000 or 1,200 because they're competing with me, but maybe I can help somebody at 600. So if that's you, hopefully the rest of this video will be informative. And if not, at least maybe I'll learn something just by going through this game. So let's take a look. Right here, you can see the cap score just underneath the title, 22% for the winner and 21% for the loser of this game. Now I'm going to slide my title out of the way by clicking right here, and I'm going to slide my camera view out of the way by clicking here. So you can see that the graph here at the top of the page jumps up and down, up and down, up and down throughout the course of the game. And as I scroll down, you will see that the winner had 11 blunders and the loser had 8 blunders. There were 5 missed wins by the loser, which if you have looked at the game review very often, you'll realize that a missed win is just a blunder separated into a separate category by chess.com. Now, if we scroll down, there were no mistakes or blunders until move 10, which is the first mistake. But then after that, let's drag this down. Look at this. That is a lot of mistakes. The mistakes are the orange ones and the blunders are the red ones. They threw in a couple of great moves here. That's black, which lost the game, but then a whole bunch more blunders and mistakes. Then white makes a great move. These are a bunch of missed wins, and then ending with a great move. Okay, so we're going to take a look at this game, and I'm going to slide my camera view back into place. There I am, and my title, because why not have those there since I went through the trouble of making them. All right, let's take a look at the game. Okay, I have recropped, and I have put the Stockfish suggestions down below me, which just keep in mind, they don't make a lot of difference until the game has progressed just a little bit. But anyway, white here opens with e4 and black responds with the Scandinavian. This isn't a 10-minute rapid game, by the way. One thing that I was surprised about was that both players used almost all their time. But I'm just going to go ahead and give that as a first tip for any of you who are rated significantly below me. If you're playing in 10-minute or longer games, try to use at least more than half of that time. I see a lot of games, even in my own earlier games, when I go back and look through my archive, I'll see games where I was lost after 30 moves and I'd only used up 3 or 4 minutes. I could have taken more time and made better moves. So that's tip number 1, even though it really doesn't apply specifically to this game. Here, white surprised me by playing f3. I guess they didn't know that the best move in the Scandinavian was just to take this pawn. Instead, they protected their e-pawn. And here, I probably would have taken back, but Stockfish says that would have been a mistake. Just go ahead and play e5, is what Stockfish suggests. Regardless, black makes some attempt to develop pieces, and white just throws pawns forward. I have seen a triangle-like opening before, but usually it's on these squares because white has opened with d4. I don't know if that's called a triangle system, or it's also, I think, part of the Kali system, but it's on a d4 opening. I don't think I've ever seen this structure here, certainly not in the first 3 moves of the game. But I also don't know that it's definitely bad. Stockfish says black has an advantage here, but not that much of one. Well, they push that pawn forward, which the computer didn't like, but it does exert some control here, so at least black is trying to control center squares and get pieces out. White throws another pawn forward, black gets another piece out. I mean, this isn't horrible. Even if you don't know any openings, you should know that at the beginning of the game, you're trying to occupy and control center squares. Center squares being e4, d4, e5, and d5. Those 4 that I've highlighted in. Both players occupy one right, but black is the player that is throwing more support into these squares with these 2 knights. Your queen, for that matter, looks at center squares as well. I think that's why black has the advantage here. But we haven't gotten to a mistake yet, so let's keep going. Again, white thinks that pawns are the only pieces that can move. All right. You might have good luck bringing your queen out early, but in general, it's not a good idea. There are only a few instances in which it is, and in those cases, you're more than justified in bringing your queen out. but you should know when those instances are. Here was not a good instance. Now you've brought the game back to even. There was no point in bringing the queen out at all. And in fact, it's an extra impediment to your dark squared bishop, which can't get out because of this pawn. But even if the pawn wasn't there, it couldn't go anywhere because your queen's in the way. And you really should, in almost every instance. Again, there are exceptions, but in almost every instance, you should bring your bishops and your knights out, and maybe a couple of pawns before getting your queen out. White moves their first piece, which is to develop this bishop. The engine didn't like that at all, but since white has put all their pawns on light squares, or all these pawns, I don't know what those two are, playing a separate game over on that side. But I mean, I can see that white might have actually had a plan here by putting this dark squared bishop here, since it can peek out from between these pawns. Okay. Or maybe they were thinking of playing with the C pawn here and wanted an extra degree of protection on that square, which you didn't really need because the knight already did that. It's not a mistake to not do this, but the engine is suggesting this. And that's one reason to not move these pawns around your king, because you create what are called, in this case, dark squared weaknesses. This is a weakness here because those pawns used to guard that square, but you moved them. So nothing's guarding that. This is a check. If you move the queen there right now. Stockfish didn't like you putting the queen here in the first place, but since it's there, why not use it? There's nothing that can block that check. So the king is forced to move, which not only wastes a tempo for white, but makes sure that they can never ever castle for the rest of the game. That's why Stockfish is suggesting that move. However, black, I guess, realized their mistake in putting the queen out early and just moved it back. Or maybe, let's back up, maybe they saw this bishop move and thought the bishop was coming here to attack the queen, protected by this pawn. Of course, they shouldn't have been worried about that. I'm bad at drawing arrows today. They shouldn't have been worried about that because the knight guards that square, so this really wasn't a threat. But maybe that's what they thought, I don't know. Or maybe that had been a mouse slip earlier when they moved the queen there in the first place and they just retracted it. Who knows? Regardless, the game is about even. After showing some idea that they need to get some pieces out, forgot about that and went back to putting pawns out. Remember, white is the player that posted in the forum. The reason that I got the idea to make this video or to look at their game. This just isn't good. Now, if you're in a blitz or a bullet game, it might be a little better, even at my level or higher, because some players play this way and they do pretty well. They've studied a lot of middle game tactics and end game tactics, don't know anything about openings, and they have pretty good luck just throwing a bunch of pawns forward in the first 10 seconds, sometimes even pre-moving those pawn moves. But in a rapid game where the opponent has time to think, this isn't a good idea. Just FYI. Black decides to take a page out of white's book and just moves a pawn. Perhaps they're preparing to play b5, and white throws another pawn forward. Now this time, look it up if you don't know what en passant means. If I remember during editing, I'll put the spelling of it right here on the screen so you can look it up. I'm not going to explain it in this video, but black could have just taken that pawn here. But maybe they didn't know that. So they instead went about with the reason that they played this in the first place, apparently, was to put this pawn here. White just takes it. Again, no pieces developed except that one bishop. All these pieces are still on their home squares. Okay, so black should take back here, and they do. This is actually good for black. It opens up this file for the rook. Of course, this bishop now can get out. Black is actually ahead in development for those reasons. For unknown reasons, white plays g4. Okay, I think that was the first thing that the game review marked as a mistake. Once again, black should play e5 here. They need to support this pawn that's in the center. Black can protect it immediately and forever by playing e5 now, but that also will allow the dark squared bishop to get out. e5 or e6 are the top two moves suggested by the engine, but black has already given in to white's plan of pushing pawns, so they do that. Maybe they wanted to play g5, I have no idea at this point. Now, white actually plays one of their better moves in this position, which is to play queen to c2. Now, the engine didn't love it, but it was among the top three moves. One reason for that is that this knight is undefended. If the queen can get to that knight, that's a check, and it attacks the rook at the same time. So black needs to immediately respond by protecting that knight, or moving it somewhere. And to their credit, they did protect it. So not bad. White actually plays one of their better moves in this situation as well, which is developing this knight. And again, black needs to protect that center pawn. Going back to opening principles, we're trying to occupy and control center squares, which again are these four squares right here: e5, d5, e4, and d4. Those are very important to occupy and or control early in the game. And black has done a better job of that than white by having these two knights here, but you can lock that in by playing e5 here. Okay, so black played that, which doesn't do anything. And that's the problem with that move. It completely wastes a move. You're not attacking this pawn. You're not protecting anything. The rook can't go anywhere from there. I mean, yes, the rook can actually capture that pawn, and yes, it actually can legally capture both of those pawns. But it doesn't want to, because you don't want to lose a rook for a pawn. So the only thing the rook can do from here is go back. If being completely honest, one thing that it actually does there is prevent this pawn from moving forward. And we know that white wanted to move pawns, so maybe that's what black was thinking. Maybe they thought they were blockading that A pawn, but this isn't good. It is developing a piece, but it's developing a piece to a bad square, where it's basically just trapped itself, and its only use now is its only available squares are back where it just came from. So think about when we're developing pieces, we're developing them to squares where we can do things with them. Now, white plays knight to f4, which I believe the engine counted as a mistake or a blunder. What they should have done instead was play knight to c1. I have no idea what that does. I really don't. Or bishop to g2. Now that I do understand, because since black never checked us earlier when the queen was out here, we can still castle. We move this bishop here, castle. So I understand that one. Or rook to a2. Don't really understand that either. Not sure what that would accomplish, but I do understand this one. But instead, white plays this. Not sure where that's going. Not sure where they wanted to go with that. Were they thinking about coming into the middle and trading off these knights? Because that would break open the center, and you don't want to do that with your king still sitting in. So that really doesn't accomplish anything, especially since one of white's best moves, or black's best moves for the last several turns, has been e5. Did they play it now? They did not. Black took this pawn. Okay, now maybe that was black's plan, part of black's plan the whole time when they put this rook here. I don't know. Maybe they thought, if I have two attackers on that square, I'll win that pawn. Or they thought, if white takes back with the a pawn, I'll win their rook. Maybe that's why Stockfish was suggesting to move the rook here earlier. But the problem with this is you can just win that knight for a pawn. That knight just took a pawn, and you can just take it back with the bishop, because the rook's not going to take, or it shouldn't, because of this pawn. White can just win a piece for a pawn here. And of course, if you're looking at Stockfish below me, that is the best move. Did white do that? No. White put their queen here. Okay, I'm pretty sure that's a blunder. Number one, it doesn't accomplish anything. Now, going back, the only thing I can think of that accomplishes is that it protects this pawn. And they thought maybe the knight was attacking that pawn. But that pawn is, of course, already protected by the light squared bishop, because you never moved it to g2 earlier when Stockfish thought that was the best idea. That pawn's protected, so this doesn't make any sense. Unless they thought that this pawn wasn't going to be guarding the bishop when the bishop took. I don't know. But you can think about this. How long did white spend on this move? White actually spent 20 seconds on that. So I have no idea why. But I think if you take 20 seconds, you can see that you can just take this knight. Even if they could take back safely, which they can't here, you've traded a piece. But here you have this pawn that will take the rook back. So you would get two pieces if they took back. It's either getting the knight for free, or for that pawn, or it's getting a knight and a rook for a bishop. Not too bad. But for whatever reason, white moved the queen to b3. That is a blunder flat out. Once again, Stockfish is recommending e5, but what black plays is bishop to e6, which is a blunder. It gives white a huge advantage. This is what's called a one-move threat. That bishop can't actually take that queen because it's the queen's turn. It's white's turn now. White's just going to move the queen, or better yet, white's just going to take the bishop because you just moved it there. And in order to take back, you're going to have to dislodge your f7 pawn, which isn't a good idea. So yeah, that's why this is a blunder. You basically just lose a piece for nothing. If they do take with that, well, then you can just take it back. And then you'll have a queen sitting right there, blocking in that e pawn. Okay, let's see what white does. Does white take the bishop? No. White moves the queen out of the way. But it still leaves white with a very slight advantage. Again, this was just a one-move threat. All it did was maybe gain a tempo, even if this knight wasn't sitting here. But now what you've done to yourself, if you're playing with the black pieces, is you've blocked in your own e-pawn. So again, the dark squared bishop cannot get out. Okay, so white has moved out of this threat. What black should do is get this knight out of there because it's in danger. It's been in danger for a couple of turns, but instead they protected it with the queen. Okay, well, you can still take this bishop, for one thing, and in that case, the queen will take back. Or, now that your queen is protecting your rook, you can just take the knight with the pawn. Did white do either one of those things? No, white pushed their e-pawn forward. The problem with this, now it looks like it's a pawn fork. To the untrained eye, I wouldn't have thought this was a pawn fork because I know that this square, the e5 square, is not protected by any of my pieces. And that one of those pieces you've just attacked actually has the ability to move right there and capture that pawn. And black saw it. Good job, black. Black saw that. That's a check. You have to block. What does, or move out of the way. Stockfish actually says king to f2 is the best move. Since you've never made an effort to move this bishop and castle, might as well just move your king here now. And white blocks with the bishop. Okay, I'm not sure exactly why that's bad, but Stockfish didn't like it at all. It says to move this knight here, which of course threatens this, but I don't know why they wouldn't just take back. I guess it's trying to distract from this. But instead, black moved their queen over there, which is a blunder. And the reason it's a blunder is because you can still take this knight with this pawn. It's just sitting there. Does white finally see it? You can also take it with your bishop. Either way is going to be fine for white. But white unattacks that knight. Well, that's a huge blunder. And it's a blunder because you can now check here with the knight that you forgot to capture, and it's protected by the queen. C2 is protected by the queen now. You can check, win the rook for a knight. All that time that knight was sitting there should have been captured, Did black see that? Yes, black saw that. Because white should have captured the knight several turns ago. Okay, so king to f2 is still the best move here for this check. Or king to d1. What does white play? King to d2. Okay, now, best move is for black to take the rook, which they did. Now, I assume the queen's going to take it back. Okay, that's probably what I would play just out of habit, is taking it back. Stockfish says the best move is actually to take this bishop with your knight. I think that's because you attack the queen there, and you're going to win this knight anyway, probably. And of course, if they instead try to move the knight out at that point, then you would just take their queen. So they would move their queen someplace. Then you have the option possibly of winning the other bishop for this knight. If they take back, of course, then you just win this knight. But, so white took the knight first. Black moved that knight back there. So white needs to take this bishop now. Do they do it? No, they move another pawn forward. Again, one of the reasons for taking this bishop is that even if they take back, it removes this pawn and opens this diagonal to this king, which is still in the center of the board. Okay. Black responds by playing g5, which I don't know if that was a blunder or not. If you're seeing Stockfish, you're seeing the best move is still to take that bishop. But white takes that pawn, which I understand you don't want to take back here because you would win that rook. What does black do? Black takes back. Okay. Well, I was looking at this game from white's perspective, but if you're the one playing with the black pieces here, you have to recognize that pawn move that white just played, this attack right here, it wasn't an attack on that pawn or on that pawn. It was an attack on this rook. And black took back. How long did black spend on that move? 10 seconds. Could find nothing wrong with playing that move. Okay. Well, white took that rook, which is probably what I would play in that situation, because that was the whole idea of taking this pawn in the first place, is trying to bait them into taking this, and black fell for it. Okay, so now black gets this knight, right? No, black does not get the knight. Why is this not obvious? Black knows that pawns capture diagonally because they just did that. But they don't know that that can happen. So instead, they push this pawn forward, where maybe hoping to do the same thing. Maybe that's what they saw, is that, hey, this just happened to me over here where they removed that pawn and got my rook. Maybe the same thing will happen here. But it didn't, of course. And of course, white should still take this bishop. Okay. White, for unexplained reasons, moved their knight over here. Okay, we don't know what they're doing. It's possible they were looking at a check here because that bishop is pinned. But of course, the king could just move out of that check. So not sure why they, I mean, we obviously know they should have moved it because it was in danger, but why not just take this bishop that's been sitting there the whole time? But anyway, they moved the knight out to the edge, and black went ahead with their plan. Remember, black has just moved this pawn, so they put that pawn there for a reason, and that reason was to take that other pawn. Okay, well now white can check here. Is that what they did? No. They just moved this knight here. What other reason would they have moved it there for other than to check? So instead they capture over here on b3, which is a blunder. There's a check here for one thing, and then you've lined up the queen and the rook pointed straight down at all these pieces. And what did black play? Black moved this knight here into the middle of the board. White can still play this check, by the way. Stockfish is also suggesting king to e1. I think that's because if this check comes, you'll want to be able to move around this way. But I'm not sure on that one. Some of these Stockfish moves are a level beyond me. I certainly wouldn't play king to e1 here. I also don't think I would check here. But I might, because again, that bishop is pinned. The king has to move out of check, and then I would finally take this bishop. White plays queen to b2, which I guess they're lining up for a check here. Okay, well, black should definitely check now. But what did they play instead? Oh, they took a pawn that was defended by another pawn. And we know that black knows how pawns move because they've been in these situations before. Does white capture back? No, white checks on the back rank. Okay. Well, white has a slight advantage here, but they lost most of it for not taking that free knight. Actually, I don't know if that was the best move. What was white's best move here, according to Stockfish? Yeah, it was to take the knight. F captures g4. Or even just take this bishop with check. Wow, that would have given white a huge advantage. Or this. But instead they checked back here, which seems like an obvious move. That was the whole reason they put their queen here in the first place, so I completely understand that. I wouldn't count that as a blunder even if Stockfish does. Black only has 2 legal moves, and that's one of them, so that's fine. Well, now you can pick up this bishop for free, which I would be tempted to do, but that is not one of the best moves. Best move is actually here. Queen to b5 check, because that would trade off the queens. I'm not going to call white out for this move because that's probably what I would have played too. But it's a blunder because it blunders mate into. Because now black can check here. The king can't escape this way, or this way, or this way. So it would have to go there, and that would be mate. So that's one reason that we always check for checks, captures, and threats before we make a move. Our queen was down here, and that's why the engine kept wanting black to check over here on a5 this way, because it couldn't check here. But now our queen isn't here anymore on these 2 squares where it was. The queen went way down there, and it's not protecting anything. And this check is protected, and that pawn guards this getaway square, as does the knight for that matter. So yeah, mate into right here. They actually didn't find it and went here for some reason. They didn't see their check. That's one thing you want to check for before every move is, do I have any checks in this position? Black did not go through that checklist in their head at that point. Okay, white needs to play knight to c4 here. That's because this pawn protects that square, and it would keep the queen from coming down. They could, of course, take with the bishop. Yeah, that's what the engine wants white to play, or queen to b5 check again, because again, you want to trade off these queens. This kind of forces a queen trade, because black's queen is not defended at this point, and you would be checking them, so they would either need to take and lose their queen that way, queen for queen, or lose their queen for free. So I get that move totally. What I don't get is white playing that, because now it blunders mate in 1. Because before, White's king had the getaway square. But now that this knight is here, there's no getaway square. The knight is covering d1 now. And of course, the pawn is still covering these two squares. So yeah, that's checkmate. Right there, queen to c3 checkmate. And black plays... Okay, I guess they thought they were attacking this pawn with their knight, and now they want to attack it with their bishop. Well, now the engine wants white to check here. Is that what they played? Oh, they just took the bishop. The problem with that, of course, is that this is mate in one. But black did not see that and instead moved their rook over to attack this queen. Of course, the queen can check here. Is that what the queen did? Oh, it can also check there. Okay. Now white has a forced mating sequence, mate in 16 if they can find it. They played queen to e8, which is not part of that mating sequence, but white still has a huge advantage because black has consistently failed to see this. One reason white has an advantage, I think, is because the knight is helping to cut off squares around the king. This knight is helping to cut off squares around the king. And of course, you have these two pieces that have infiltrated behind your ranks. So the king goes there. I'm pretty sure I would check here with the knight. I think that's what I would do. But white instead takes a pawn with check, which isn't horrible. I would be tempted to play that too, picking off enemy pieces one by one. But what white has to do now is check on every turn, because again, this is mate. So black gets out of check. White has several different checks in this position, and they found one of them, which was back the square they just came from. Black moves over there this time. Now you can check here, and that blocks the checkmate. But white plays here, planning who knows what. Maybe thinking about coming around this way to check, I don't know. But again, they've blundered checkmate. It's mate in one. Does black find it? No, black went down here where the knight can just take the rook. And the knight didn't take the rook. White checked with the rook instead. Okay, they moved out of check. Okay, and white took with the rook. But the problem with that is that this is still mate in one. Does black find it? No. Go back. Mate in one. Protected bishop. That's what black did. And just so you know, the clocks aren't on the screen here, but black has more time on the clock. Almost 3 minutes left. And that's what they played. And of course, white took it with check, and black resigned. And now white has mate in 4. But hopefully just walking through this game, you saw that both players made surprising blunders in some cases. Now, in a few other cases, they were harder to spot, even for me. There were places where the computer counted it as a mistake, or at least not one of the top moves, but it looked reasonable to me. But once we spotted that mate in one here, and the black kept missing the mate in one, why else did they move this knight down here in the first place when they moved it here, other than to guard that square? And of course, this pawn is guarding these two squares. They put it there on move 2 or 3, right? And they put it there on move 3. This pawn's been here the whole time, guarding these two squares. And the queen was right there lined up with that. So, gotta check, especially once your queen is out in the middle of the board and their king isn't castled, you have to start looking for checks. Hopefully some of this was helpful. If not, I think maybe I learned something too, reinforcing opening principles, reinforcing to look for checks and captures, reinforcing to look at which squares are protected. Over here, we saw when black took the pawn with their knight right here, white could have just taken it, but neither player saw that. If this wasn't helpful, apologize for wasting your time, but you probably didn't make it this far in the video anyway. For those of you that did, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.